Welcome, and thank you for joining us on this gentle journey through history. Tonight, we are drifting back to a time of grand empires, intricate social tapestries, and a love story that would echo through the ages. We are exploring the life of Napoleon Bonaparte, not as a conqueror on the battlefield, but as a man whose heart was captured by a woman of unique grace and resilience, Josephine de Beauharnais. Our destination is the heart of 18th century France, a world of both revolutionary fervor and lingering aristocratic elegance, where their destinies intertwined in a way that forever changed the course of history. Imagine, if you will, the flickering candlelight in a Parisian salon, the scent of jasmine and wood smoke on a cool evening breeze. We are stepping into a period of profound upheaval. The old world of absolute monarchy has been swept away by the French Revolution, a tempest of ideas and violence that has left the nation both energized and exhausted. Into this crucible steps a young, ambitious Corsican artillery officer named Napoleon. He is a man of sharp intellect and boundless energy, yet also a soul-seeking connection in a fragmented world. His life is a whirlwind of military campaigns and political maneuvering, but at its center is a quiet, enduring need for a partner who can understand the solitude of his ambition. Meanwhile, on the other side of this tumultuous social landscape lives Josephine. Born Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie on the lush tropical island of Martinique, she is a woman who has navigated the treacherous waters of the Revolution with both luck and fortitude. She has known the heights of privilege and the depths of despair, having been imprisoned during the Reign of Terror and narrowly escaping the guillotine. Josephine is a survivor, a widow with 2 children, and a woman who moves with an innate charm and grace that captivates all who meet her. Her voice is soft, her manner gentle, and her spirit is a balm to the agitated world around her. Their meeting is not a grand romantic affair of poetry and serenades. Instead, it is a calculated introduction in a society still rebuilding its norms. Yet, what begins as a social arrangement blossoms into something far more profound. Napoleon is utterly smitten. His letters to Josephine are not the careful prose of a diplomat, but the impassioned, often desperate pleas of a man in love. He writes to her from the front lines of his military campaigns, his words a testament to a yearning that no victory could quell. For him, Josephine is more than a woman. She is a sanctuary, a symbol of the stable, elegant life he craves. She is his guiding star. For Josephine, the relationship is a path to security and social standing. She is older than Napoleon, more worldly, and perhaps more cautious. But in time, she comes to see the depth of his devotion. She finds in him not just a man of power, but a man who values her, who respects her experience, and who sees her not for her past, but for her present and future. Their marriage is a union of 2 very different souls, one driven by raw ambition, the other by a quiet resilience, yet together they form a powerful partnership that will shape an empire. As we settle in for our journey, let us move beyond the familiar portraits of the emperor and his empress. We will look past the grand palaces and the famous battles to focus on the intimate spaces of their lives. We will explore the letters they exchanged, the quiet moments of their days, the challenges they faced together and apart. This is a story of love, yes, but also of sacrifice, betrayal, and the painful choices that even the most powerful of people must make. The tale of Napoleon and Josephine is a reminder that behind every historical figure is a person, with a heart that beats with the same hopes and fears as our own. So let us begin our gentle descent into this fascinating past, a story that is as timeless as it is captivating. Our story begins far from the grand palaces of Europe, on the sun-drenched volcanic shores of Martinique, a French colony in the Caribbean. Here, in 1763, Marie-Joseph Rose Tacher de la Pagerie was born into a world of tropical rhythms and colonial society. Her family, of French aristocratic lineage, owned a sugar plantation. For young Rose, as she was known, life was a gentle rhythm of warm breezes, the rustling of palm leaves, and the fragrant scent of jasmine and sugarcane. She was not a girl of extraordinary beauty in the classical sense, but she possessed a grace and charm that was both captivating and serene. Her childhood was one of relative privilege, filled with the leisure and social expectations of the French colonial elite. Yet, even in this seemingly idyllic setting, her destiny was already being shaped by forces far beyond her control. Her father, Joseph Gaspar Tascher, was a minor nobleman, and like many families of the time, their financial stability was fragile. As Rose entered her teenage years, the need for a strategic marriage became paramount. The family's fortunes had begun to dwindle, and a connection to a more influential branch of the family back in France was seen as the solution. This is a common theme in the lives of historical figures. Personal desires often take a backseat to family obligations and the cold, hard realities of social and economic survival. The plan was not for Rose, but for her younger sister, Catherine Désirée. A match had been arranged for Catherine with the Vicomte Alexandre de Beauharnais, a young, promising French nobleman. However, fate had other plans. Catherine sadly passed away before the marriage could be finalized. In an almost unimaginable twist of events from our modern perspective, the arrangement simply shifted to the next available sister. And so, it was decided that Rose, the elder sister, would go to France to marry Alexandre in her sister's stead. Imagine the transition for her. From the vibrant, humid landscapes of Martinique to the bustling, often chilly and gray world of 18th century Paris. The journey itself was long and arduous, a testament to the immense distances and slower pace of life in that era. Rose, now adopting the name Josephine, arrives in a world of powdered wigs, elaborate gowns, and a complex social etiquette she must quickly learn. The marriage to Alexandre de Beauharnais, however, was not the fairy tale she might have hoped for. It was a union of convenience, and Alexandre, a man of ambition and a reputation for womanizing, was often absent. He found Josephine's provincial manners and lack of sophisticated Parisian polish somewhat disappointing. Yet, their marriage did produce two children, Eugène and Hortense, who would become central figures in Josephine's life and a source of her enduring strength. The early years of her first marriage were difficult. She experienced loneliness and the subtle humiliations of a husband who was emotionally distant and unfaithful. She spent time living apart from him, often at a convent, seeking refuge and solace. Yet, even through these trials, Josephine cultivated a resilience and a quiet dignity that would serve her well. She was learning to navigate a world that was often unforgiving to women, especially those without a powerful husband's full devotion. This period of her life, marked by hardship and disappointment, was not a time of weakness, but a forging of her character. She learned to be resourceful, charming, and patient, qualities that would later prove invaluable. We are watching a life unfold, a young woman learning to survive in a society that is on the brink of immense change. The gilded cages of the aristocracy were about to be shattered by the thunder of revolution. Josephine, with her children and her difficult marriage, was unknowingly being prepared for the greatest role of her life. She was a woman of gentle beginnings, but her spirit was becoming as unbreakable as the will of the revolutionary storm gathering on the horizon. As we drift through this moment, we are seeing the quiet prelude to a love story that will forever be tied to the destiny of an empire. The world of Josephine's unhappy marriage was soon to be engulfed by a far greater turmoil, the French Revolution. We are now entering a period of profound social and political transformation, a time when the old order was not just challenged, but violently dismantled. The year 1789 marked the beginning of this seismic shift, with the storming of the Bastille, a moment that symbolized the collapse of royal authority and the rise of popular will. For an aristocrat like Josephine, these were terrifying and precarious times. Her social status, once a source of privilege, now made her a target. The world she had known, with its predictable customs and hierarchies, was vanishing in a wave of republican fervor. Alexandre de Beauharnais, her estranged husband, initially embraced the revolutionary cause, becoming a general in the new army. He was a man of the Enlightenment, believing in the ideals of liberty and equality. However, the revolution, like a hungry fire, was insatiable. It began to consume its own. A new, more radical phase began with the Reign of Terror, a period from 1793 to 1794 where paranoia and suspicion led to mass executions. Citizens were encouraged to denounce their neighbors, and a simple accusation could lead to a swift trial and the guillotine. The air in Paris was thick with fear and uncertainty. The streets, once scenes of elegant carriages, were now dominated by revolutionary parades and the constant threat of public violence. In a tragic twist of fate, Alexandre de Beauharnais fell victim to this very system. His military failures and aristocratic background made him a suspect in the eyes of the radical government. He was arrested, and Josephine, due to her connection to him, was also imprisoned in the Carmes prison in Paris. Imagine the conditions of this confinement, crowded, unsanitary, and filled with the constant dread of the unknown. Josephine, a woman who had known both the comforts of a Caribbean plantation and the luxuries of Parisian high society, was now reduced to a prisoner, her life hanging by a thread. She was just one among many, including some of her former social acquaintances, all waiting for their fate to be decided by a tribunal that was more about ideology than justice. During her imprisonment, she relied on her wit, her charm, and her ability to make connections. She formed friendships with other prisoners, including the future mistress of Paul Barras, the powerful Directory member who would later become a key figure in her life. This period was not just a test of her endurance, but a masterclass in survival. She learned to read people, to understand the shifting tides of power, and to find hope in the smallest gestures of kindness. Her life, and the lives of her children, were in constant peril. We can almost hear the low hum of the guillotine in the distance, a grim reminder of the finality of the revolutionary justice. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the reign of terror ended. The execution of Maximilien Robespierre in July 1794 brought an end to the most radical phase of the revolution. The doors of the prisons, including the one holding Josephine, began to open. She was freed, but the world she emerged into was forever changed. Her husband had been executed just a few days before Robespierre's fall, and she was now a widow, a single mother to 2 children, and her family's fortune had been confiscated. She was penniless and alone in a city that was slowly piecing itself back together. This period of her life, filled with loss and near-death experiences, forged the strong, resilient woman who would soon meet Napoleon. She was no longer the naive young woman from Martinique. She was a survivor. She had seen the worst of humanity, and yet retained her gentle grace. She learned to navigate a society in flux, using her charm and newly found connections to rebuild her life. She was a woman who understood the preciousness of life and the value of stability, qualities that would make her the perfect counterbalance to the restless ambition of a young general about to enter her life. The revolutionary chaos that had nearly destroyed Josephine's life was also the forge in which another destiny was being hammered into shape. Napoleon Bonaparte, a young and brilliant artillery officer, was swiftly rising through the ranks of the French army. A Corsican by birth, he spoke French with a heavy accent and was often seen as an outsider, but his military genius was undeniable. He distinguished himself at the Siege of Toulon in 1793, and by 1795, he had become a hero of the revolution after suppressing a royalist uprising in Paris. This crucial moment brought him to the attention of Paul Barras, a leading member of the Directory, the 5-man committee that now governed France. It was in the salons of post-revolutionary Paris that these 2 disparate lives were finally brought together. The city, though still recovering from the terror, was also a place of new beginnings, and its social scene was a vibrant mixture of the old aristocracy and the new, powerful figures of the Republic. Josephine, with her elegant manners and her connections to influential men like Barras, was a central figure in this world. She had, through her wit and her ability to charm, rebuilt her life from the ashes of her past. She was a woman of experience, a survivor who knew the value of connections and the art of social navigation. The initial meeting is often recounted in different ways, but the most popular version tells of a dinner party or a gathering at Barras's home in 1795. Napoleon, a man of intense focus and ambition, was introduced to Josephine, who was 6 years his senior. He was immediately captivated. He saw in her a grace and a gentle sophistication that he, a rough-hewn soldier, lacked. Her poise, her soft voice, her warm, welcoming nature were a stark contrast to the harsh realities of his military life. For Napoleon, who was often a solitary figure, Josephine represented a world of elegance, stability, and affection that he desperately craved. For Josephine, the initial attraction was less instantaneous. She saw a man who was intense, perhaps a little awkward in social settings, and whose ambition was almost palpable. He was a rising star, to be sure, and a connection to him offered her and her children a much-needed sense of security. But it was his unwavering and passionate devotion that truly won her over. Napoleon, a man who commanded armies, was utterly smitten. He showered her with letters and attentions, his words a torrent of raw, unfiltered emotion that was both overwhelming and sincere. He saw in her not just a woman, but a symbol of the very France he sought to protect and lead, a country of grace, history, and beauty. Their relationship blossomed with a speed that mirrored the pace of the age. They were married in a civil ceremony in March 1796, just 2 days before Napoleon was to leave for his first command of the French army in Italy. This was a union that was both a partnership of convenience and a fiery, passionate romance. Josephine, a woman who had known loss and hardship, found in Napoleon a man who would be her protector and her greatest admirer. Napoleon, a man on the cusp of an incredible destiny, found in Josephine his emotional anchor. He even began to call her Josephine, a name he preferred over Rose, and it is by this name that she is known to history. As they stood on the threshold of their new life together, the future was full of both promise and uncertainty. Napoleon was about to embark on a campaign that would make him a legend, and Josephine was about to become the wife of a man whose ambition knew no bounds. Their love story, born in the tumultuous aftermath of a revolution, was about to become an integral part of the grand narrative of European history. This gentle and quiet beginning was a prelude to a life that would be anything but. The marriage of Napoleon and Josephine was immediately tested by the rigors of war. Just 2 days after their civil ceremony, Napoleon left Paris to take command of the army of Italy. This was a critical moment for him, and his success would be the foundation of his future power. But for Josephine, it meant a swift return to a life of separation, a feeling she had known all too well in her first marriage. However, this time was different. Napoleon, in his absence, began to write her a series of letters that are today considered among the most passionate and revealing in history. They were not the dispatches of a general, but the desperate, heartfelt pleadings of a man in love. Imagine the young general, surrounded by the harsh realities of military life, the dust of the Italian plains, the clamor of the battlefield, the cold logic of strategy. Yet, in his mind, he was consumed by thoughts of Josephine. His letters are filled with longing and jealousy, a potent mix of devotion and insecurity. "I love you more than life itself," he would write, "and I have not spent a day without loving you. I have not spent a night without embracing you." He often complained of her infrequent replies, a testament to the slow and uncertain nature of communication in that era. He was a man of action, but his letters reveal a man of deep, almost vulnerable emotion, a side of Napoleon that few others ever saw. Meanwhile, in Paris, Josephine was navigating a very different world. She was now the wife of a rising star, and her social standing had improved dramatically. She held salons and entertained influential figures, using her charm and grace to consolidate her husband's social and political position in the capital. She was, in many ways, his representative, a gentle hand guiding their social fortunes while he was away fighting. But the distance was a strain. Her life in Paris was a whirlwind of social engagements, and she was not as consumed by the emotional torment of separation as Napoleon was. This difference in their responses to distance and time would become a recurring theme in their relationship. Eventually, Napoleon's pleas for her to join him became irresistible. He demanded her presence, writing of his misery without her. She finally consented and traveled to Italy, a long and uncomfortable journey, to be with him. Their reunion was a moment of intense joy for Napoleon. He had won brilliant victories on the battlefield, but the true prize was having Josephine by his side. They spent time together in Milan, their relationship rekindling in the beautiful setting of Italy. This period was a brief but blissful interlude, a moment of peace before the storm of their lives truly began. Napoleon's military successes in Italy were remarkable, and they transformed him from a promising young general into a national hero, a name known across Europe. As Napoleon's star rose, so too did Josephine's. She was no longer just the widow of a nobleman. She was the wife of the most powerful man in France. This partnership, born of a whirlwind courtship and forged in the fire of Napoleon's ambition, was becoming a cornerstone of his public image. He presented her as a woman of elegance and dignity, the perfect complement to his own powerful, yet often roughshod persona. Their love story was becoming part of the public narrative of France, a symbol of stability and hope after years of revolutionary chaos. The passion of their letters and the strength of their bond were the foundation upon which an empire would one day be built. The path from military hero to emperor was swift and marked by both political shrewdness and popular acclaim. Napoleon's military victories in Italy and later in Egypt solidified his reputation as a brilliant commander. Upon his return from Egypt in 1799, he saw a France still struggling with political instability under the Directory. Seizing the moment with characteristic decisiveness, he orchestrated a coup d'etat, an action that saw him become first consul of France. This new role was, in essence, a dictatorship cloaked in republican terms. For Josephine, this meant a dramatic transformation of her life. She was no longer just the wife of a general, but the partner of the most powerful man in France, the de facto ruler of the nation. As first consul, Napoleon set about rebuilding France from the ground up. He implemented vast reforms in law, education, and administration, many of which still form the basis of modern French society. Josephine was by his side, not as a political advisor, but as a crucial social and cultural force. She was a master of the salons, a world that Napoleon found tedious, but which he recognized as essential for consolidating power. Josephine's elegance, grace, and impeccable social skills helped to bring a sense of stability and normalcy to a society weary of revolution. She was the gentle face of the new regime, a bridge between the old aristocratic world and the new order. People were charmed by her, and her presence softened the often austere image of her husband. In 1804, a mere 5 years after his coup, Napoleon decided to take the final step in his rise to power. He would declare himself Emperor of the French. The coronation was not a traditional religious affair, but a grand political spectacle designed to legitimize his rule and establish a new dynasty. At Notre Dame Cathedral, with Pope Pius VII in attendance, Napoleon did something unprecedented. He crowned himself, a symbolic gesture to show that his power came not from God, but from his own will and the will of the French people. And then, in a moment that captured the hearts of the nation and demonstrated his deep affection for his wife, he placed the crown upon Josephine's head, anointing her as empress. This was the pinnacle of their shared journey. Josephine, the girl from Martinique who had survived the terror, was now Empress of France. Her coronation gown was a magnificent creation, a testament to the opulence of the new imperial court. As empress, she fulfilled her role with dignity and charm. She was known for her lavish wardrobe, her love of gardening, and her patronage of the arts. She created an atmosphere of refined elegance at the court, drawing on her own experience to build a sense of tradition and permanence around the new Bonaparte dynasty. She was a gracious hostess and a beloved figure, but beneath the surface, the pressures of her position were beginning to mount. The coronation was a triumph, but it also brought a new set of challenges. Napoleon's ambition was boundless, and he was determined to secure his dynasty. He needed an heir, a legitimate son, to inherit his throne and ensure the continuity of his empire. This need would become the central, tragic flaw in their otherwise powerful partnership. For now, however, they were at the zenith of their shared life, a king and queen of a new kind, ruling over a vast empire that stretched across Europe. Their story, born in passion, had reached its majestic and perhaps its most vulnerable peak. Life at the imperial court under Napoleon and Josephine was a study in contrasts. On the one hand, it was a world of breathtaking opulence. The court was centered at the Tuileries Palace and later at Fontainebleau, both of which were lavishly decorated to reflect the power and grandeur of the new empire. The fashion was a return to classical styles, with women in high-waisted dresses of fine muslin and silk, a look that Josephine championed and that became known as the Empire style. She was a style icon, and her influence was vast, not just in France, but throughout Europe. Her love of botany was also famous. She created magnificent gardens at her private estate, Château de Malmaison, filled with rare and exotic plants, particularly roses, which she collected from all over the world. However, Beneath the glittering surface of court life, there were significant challenges. Josephine's position was not as secure as it seemed. She was adored by the public, and she played her role as empress with a gentle dignity. But she was a target for Napoleon's family, who often viewed her as an outsider. His sisters, in particular, were often jealous and resentful of her influence over him, and they frequently made subtle and not so subtle attempts to undermine her. Napoleon's mother, Madame Mère, was also wary of Josephine, believing she did not have the purity of blood to be the matriarch of a true dynasty. This atmosphere of quiet tension and court intrigue was a constant source of stress for Josephine. The greatest challenge, however, was a deeply personal one that had profound political implications: the lack of a male heir. For Napoleon, the establishment of a lasting dynasty was paramount. He had risen to power through sheer force of will, but he knew that without a son to inherit the throne, his empire could crumble as quickly as it was built. He had adopted Josephine's children, Eugène and Hortense, and he loved them as his own, but they were not of his bloodline. As the years went by and no heir was born, the pressure on Josephine became unbearable. She tried every possible remedy, from trips to spas to folk remedies, but nothing worked. The fact was, she was nearing 50 and had already had 2 children from her first marriage. She was unlikely to bear another. Napoleon, despite his growing frustration, remained deeply devoted to her. He had a number of affairs, but none of them ever challenged the central place Josephine held in his heart. His letters to her from his many campaigns continued to be filled with affection, and he relied on her emotional support. Yet, the demands of the state were beginning to outweigh the desires of the heart. The whispers at court grew louder, and the calls for a divorce, a way to secure the dynasty through a new marriage, became impossible to ignore. Napoleon was facing a terrible choice: his love for the woman who had been his companion and confidant for so long, or the future of the empire he had built. As we drift through this period, we see a woman at the height of her power, surrounded by beauty and influence, but also trapped in a gilded cage. The world she had helped to create was now demanding a sacrifice of her. The crown she wore, a symbol of their shared triumph, was also a heavy burden. The love story that had begun with such passion was now entering its most painful and tragic phase, where the demands of history would force a cruel separation. The painful decision to divorce Josephine was not made lightly by Napoleon. For years, the pressure had been mounting from his inner circle, his family, and his ministers. The lack of a legitimate heir was seen as the single greatest threat to the stability of his empire. Napoleon's brothers and sisters were ambitious and constantly vying for power, and without a clear line of succession, they would surely tear the empire apart upon his death. Napoleon, the architect of this grand project, could not allow his life's work to crumble for the sake of a personal relationship, no matter how deep his feelings were. He had to be a ruler first and a husband second. The conversations leading up to the divorce were agonizing. We can only imagine the sorrow and the desperation that filled the halls of the Tuileries Palace during this period. Napoleon, who was so often seen as a man of iron will, was tormented by the choice he had to make. He still loved Josephine, and she was the one person who could truly soothe his spirit, who understood the burdens of his position without needing to be told. The moment of truth came in November 1809. Napoleon finally broached the subject with Josephine, and her reaction was one of profound grief. It is said she collapsed in his arms, weeping uncontrollably. The scene was a private tragedy, played out in the very halls of power where their shared destiny had been so brilliantly forged. The official ceremony of the divorce took place in December 1809, in the presence of Napoleon's family and the highest officials of the state. It was a somber and emotionally charged affair. The couple stood together, each reading a declaration. Napoleon's statement was a cold, pragmatic summary of the situation, citing the interest of the monarchy and my people as the reason for their separation. He acknowledged her virtues and his great love for her. Josephine's declaration was more personal and heartbreaking. She spoke of her devotion to him and their shared history, and she made it clear that she was consenting to the divorce for the good of France. It was a moment of immense sacrifice on her part. an act of loyalty to the man she still loved and the empire she had helped to create. Despite the formality of the divorce, Napoleon was determined that Josephine would be treated with all the honor and dignity she deserved. She was allowed to keep her title as empress, a unique and unprecedented arrangement. She also retained her beloved Château de Malmaison, her private estate near Paris, and received a very generous annual income. Napoleon personally saw to her well-being, writing to her often and visiting when he could. He was not casting her out, he was simply placing her in a new, separate position. Shortly after the divorce, Napoleon began the process of finding a new empress who could give him the heir he so desperately needed. He ultimately chose Marie-Louise, the 18-year-old Archduchess of Austria, a member of the powerful Habsburg dynasty. The marriage was a cold, political calculation designed to secure a critical alliance and a bloodline. For Napoleon, it was a necessary step, but it lacked the passion and genuine affection that had defined his relationship with Josephine. The love story that had enchanted an empire had come to a formal end, but the emotional bond between the two remained unbroken. The sacrifice had been made, and France now had a new empress. But it was a union of statecraft, not of the heart. The divorce may have ended their marriage, but it did not extinguish the deep emotional connection between Napoleon and Josephine. Following the annulment, Josephine retired to her cherished Château de Malmaison, her private estate near Paris. Here, she cultivated her famous gardens and lived a life of quiet dignity, surrounded by her family and her memories. She was still empress in title, and Napoleon ensured she was provided for with an enormous income, even personally approving her household accounts. This was not a severance of ties, but a conscious effort to maintain a profound, albeit non-marital, relationship. Napoleon, meanwhile, was now married to Marie-Louise of Austria, and their union was soon blessed with a son, born in 1811. He was given the title King of Rome, the heir Napoleon had so desperately sought. Despite this new family, Napoleon continued to correspond with Josephine. His letters, while no longer filled with the fiery passion of their early days, were still affectionate and concerned. He would send her news of his campaigns, and she would write back with updates on her gardens and her well-being. He trusted her judgment and often sought her counsel, knowing she was one of the few people who would be completely honest with him. In many ways, their relationship evolved into a profound and enduring friendship, a bond that was even stronger for having survived the immense tragedy of their separation. The end of their story, however, was also a reflection of the tumultuous times they lived in. Napoleon's empire, stretched to its limits by continuous warfare, began to unravel. The disastrous Russian campaign of 1812 marked the beginning of his downfall. As his power waned, Josephine watched from Malmaison with a heavy heart. She knew that his fate was intertwined with her own, and she grieved for the man she had loved and the empire they had built together. When Napoleon was finally defeated and exiled to the island of Elba in 1814, he desperately wanted to see Josephine. He requested for her to join him, a testament to her unique place in his life. But by then, it was too late. Josephine herself passed away in May 1814, not long after Napoleon's first abdication. She died at Malmaison, surrounded by her beloved family and her magnificent gardens. Her death was a moment of profound sadness for Napoleon, who was exiled and unable to mourn her properly. He was devastated by the news. It is said that for weeks afterward, he would not see visitors and was consumed by grief. Her death marked the end of an era for him, a final severing of his connection to his greatest triumphs and his deepest loves. He would later reflect that she was the one person who truly understood him. The story of Napoleon and Josephine is a powerful reminder that history is not just about political maneuverings and military campaigns. It is also a tapestry of human relationships, of love, sacrifice, and loss. Their enduring bond, even after their formal separation, is a testament to the depth of their connection. Josephine was not just a queen or an empress. She was the emotional anchor for a man who reshaped Europe, and her legacy is forever tied to his. The story of Napoleon and Josephine does not end with their deaths. Their lives, both together and apart, left an indelible mark on history, shaping not only France, but the entire world. The The legacy of their relationship is complex, a tapestry woven with threads of personal tragedy, political necessity, and enduring love. Napoleon's lasting impact on Europe is, of course, monumental. He was a man who, in a relatively short period, redrew the map of the continent, and his legal and administrative reforms, encapsulated in the Napoleonic Code, became the foundation for legal systems in many countries. However, his personal story, his love for Josephine, is what adds a human dimension to his historical image. It reminds us that even the most powerful figures are driven by human emotions. His letters to her are studied not just for their historical context, but for their raw emotional power. They provide a unique window into the heart of a man who was, by all accounts, one of history's great conquerors. Josephine's legacy is equally significant, though perhaps more subtle. She was not a warrior or a lawmaker, but she was a powerful cultural and social force. As empress, she brought a sense of grace and elegance to the new French court, helping to legitimize Napoleon's rule and bridge the gap between the old aristocracy and the new order. Her patronage of the arts, her love of gardening, and her passion for botany left a lasting mark. Her estate, Château de Malmaison, became a symbol of her refined taste and her personal sanctuary. It was a place where she and Napoleon could find a moment of peace, away from the pressures of empire. Her dedication to her children, Eugène and Hortense, also ensured that their lineage would continue to play a role in European royal houses for generations, spreading the Bonaparte name through marriage and creating a network of alliances. The love story of Napoleon and Josephine has become a legend, a subject of countless books, films, and artistic works. It is a tale that speaks to the universal themes of passion, ambition, and sacrifice. Their decision to divorce for the sake of the empire is a particularly poignant moment, highlighting the tension between private desires and public duty. It is a tragic but necessary betrayal that secured the future of Napoleon's dynasty, even as it broke both their hearts. In the end, their relationship teaches us that even in the grand sweep of history, personal connections are what often define us. Napoleon was a conqueror, but his love for Josephine was his one true conquest of the heart. Josephine was a survivor, but her greatest victory was capturing and holding the devotion of the most powerful man in Europe. As we leave them now, they remain forever intertwined, two souls whose destinies were woven together in the crucible of a new age. Their story reminds us that beneath the powdered wigs and the imperial crowns, there are always just people, loving and losing, and living their lives.